Yeah, we've been talking about the Olivet Discourse, and of course, as we've mentioned many times, sometimes I repeat myself a lot, but we know that the Olivet Discourse is actually, starting in verse 4, is actually a response. First, the whole questions of the apostles, of course, is a response to what Jesus said about this beautiful temple complex, right? He said there's not going to be one stone left on another. And we know historically that actually happened in 70 AD when the Romans came and surrounded Jerusalem, starved the people out, eventually breached the walls and destroyed the walls and the temple. And in response to his statement about this future event at that point, they asked really two questions. When will this be? In other words, when will this destruction take place? And then, what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age? And as we've talked about, Luke is the only one that really records Jesus' response to the first question. In Luke 21, I think it's verse 21 through 24. But Matthew responds to, or Matthew records Jesus' response to the second question, which is, what's the sign of your coming and the end of the age? And so, what he is, now, remember, if we go back to the Old Testament, we have an outline of what's going on here. When Daniel prayed in Daniel 9, he confessed Israel's sin. This is in Babylon, remember. He's in Babylon. He recognizes, he's read Jeremiah 29, and he knows that Jeremiah has prophesied that captivity will be 70 years. And so Daniel prays for his nation, knowing that that's just a year or two down the road. He prays to God. He confesses the sin. And you know why Daniel does that? If you remember what we saw in Deuteronomy, Deuteronomy indicates that under the Mosaic covenant, when they do sin and God does judge them, the road to restoration is repentance. And so Daniel knows that from the law, from the Old Testament, and he confesses his sin. If you read, one of the most beautiful prayers in the Bible is Daniel 9. Not the part we usually study with prophetic significance, but the first part of Daniel 9, where Daniel confesses the sin of the nation of Israel. And so he sends Gabriel, remember? That's the first appearance of Gabriel in the Bible. Well, no, I think he appears the chapter before. But Gabriel appears. Gabriel talks about the 70 weeks of Daniel, or the 490 years. And so we have this timeline of all the way up to the point of when Israel is going to be blessed and there's going to be righteousness here on the earth. And so we know that at the triumphal entry, Matthew 21, we talked about the fact that he goes in and presents himself to the leadership and to the people as the king, and there's a rejection, official rejection. Remember, the unofficial rejection's already happened back in Matthew 12 when they accused him of doing miracles through the power of Beelzebub. So they had rejected him, and from very early on they were trying to kill him. And so we have this outline in Daniel 9. Gabriel gives the timeline which leads all the way up to the establishment of the millennial kingdom, of the messianic kingdom promised. But he says at the end of 483 years that the Messiah will be cut off and have nothing. That's verse 26. And so from that alone, now whether anybody in the first century understood that and put two and two together, we don't know. But that's exactly what happened. He was cut off and had nothing when he was rejected in Matthew 21. And so the time clock stopped. And if you remember at the end of chapter 23, he says, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, who kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to her, how often I wanted to gather your children together the way a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, and you were unwilling. Behold, your house is being left you desolate. Remember, this is the adulterous generation, the evil and adulterous generation that was there when he came on the scene and rejected him as Messiah. He said, your house has been left you desolate. For I say to you, from now on, you will not see me until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. So the inference there is, if you're not going to see me, that means he's going to go away, right? So you're not going to see me until, as a nation, you come to the point to where you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. And so he's been cut off. We're looking at the timeline in Daniel 9. So he's been cut off. It says he's going to be cut off and have nothing. And then it talks about the prince of the people of the prince who is to come is going to come and destroy the city and the sanctuary and all that. That's 70 AD. So you had 483 years stop. And then 40 years down the road, give or take a year, the Romans show up and destroy the city and the sanctuary. And again, Luke deals with that in Luke 21 through 24. So that's where we're at. So if you look at that timeline, what's left? 7 years. Putting two and two together, you realize that what that means is when those 7 years start, and by the way, those 7 years are talked about in the last verse in chapter 9. Chapter 9:27 talks about the prince. Above there it said the people of the prince who is to come. That was the Romans. And the prince, we know from Daniel 7, is going to come out of the revived Roman Empire. So it all fits together. So those 7 years will be fulfilled before the millennial kingdom starts. Now, as we've looked at many times that little diagram I put together about this, that time of the church is not seen in the Old Testament. So we've actually gone 2,000 and what is it now, about 2016 years or something like that, and we're still waiting for the prince to sign a covenant with Israel. That will start. And so when they ask him about the end of the age, he is simply going back to Daniel 9 and telling them about those 7 years. That's what he's doing. That's why it's broken up in 7 years and 3.5 years and 3.5 years and 1,260 months and all this stuff. And so he gives them detail about this 7 year period. So he's going to go away. He's going to come back when they say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, which is out of Isaiah. And no, let me back up. That's out of Psalm 118. And so in this chapter 24, we've talked about the fact, and according to the notes, he deals with the first half of the tribulation in verses 4 through 8. In 9 through 14, really, he deals with the middle of the tribulation. A lot of things that happen right there in the middle of the tribulation. The persecution of the Jews kicks up because he's trying to exterminate them. And then 15 through 26 talks about the second half of the tribulation. And then when you get to 28, 29, he talks about, 28, 27, he talks about when Jesus is going to come. When he's going to come. And the Son of Man. Remember, that's what he calls himself, the Son of Man. And so he says it's not going to sneak up on you. These guys, during this time, they're going to be talking about this. Here's the Christ, and there's the Christ. His point is, you don't have to worry about that. Because when I come back, it's going to be like lightning that strikes and lights up the sky from the east to the west. It's not going to be I wonder if this is the Messiah. No, it's going to be very clear. And we know that from Revelation 19, right? Let me promise you, when Jesus appears in the clouds with all of us behind him in white raiment and on white horses, and he has that sword coming out of his mouth, and he's on a white horse, and he starts literally kicking you know what and cleaning up the earth with the armies of Armageddon that have come against the Jews, and they're fighting there. There's not going to be any question whether that's Jesus or not. So he's saying, don't be deceived by these guys that are saying, I'm the Messiah. Because they're not going to be able to do that, right? they're not going to be able to do that. And then in 29, he talks about some of the things that we say. This is actually the kind of thing that's mentioned in Joel chapter 2 about the sun will be dark and the moon will not give its light and the stars will fall from the sky. This is the blood moon stuff. We talked about that was real big a couple of years ago, and Hagee and all these guys wrote books and made money off of books about the blood moon. Something's going to happen because astrologically things are lining up and something big's going to happen, and this is why it's going to happen because of these passages. But all of these passages talk about this period of time, this 7-year period of time. I mean, Hagee's premillennial. I don't understand how he got caught up in it, but anyway, I don't know. I can't judge his heart, but he was confused or something. And so, and then in verse 32 through 34, he talks about the fig tree, and I think we did talk about this last week, that this is not some kind of secret symbol of Israel. Now we have looked at before, right? We have looked at when Jesus was leaving the temple the first time, and he saw this fig tree without any fruit on it, and he cursed it, and it just immediately died. We talked about, because of the context, it was apparent that was talking about Israel. Israel, this evil, adulterous generation of Israel, which was not producing fruit. And remember, fruit under the Mosaic covenant, fruit was they were to be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Judaism was to be a stellar example of a people that lived for God and according to the law of God, and was blessed as the result of it. Well, they certainly weren't an example of that, right? I mean, they were under Roman domination, and most of their leaders were unbelievers. They weren't even believers in Yahweh. It had just become a dead religion. And so he says, now learn the parable of the fig tree, verse 32. When its branches already become tender and puts forth its leaves, you know that summer is near. So that's all the point he's making here. And I think I mentioned it's like when we say winter's over. And the reason why I know it is because the mesquite trees are putting their leaves out, and they don't get caught off guard. For some reason, God created mesquite trees where they don't get caught. Some other trees do, but they don't. And so that's all he's saying. So he says, so you too, when you see all these things, recognize that he is near, right at the door. Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all things take place. And in the context, it is obvious that he's saying the generation that sees these signs, right? I mean, up to this point, they've asked for signs. He's told them what the signs are that indicate his second coming and the end of the age. And he's saying it's just like when you see the fig tree or the fig leaves coming out. You know summer's near. So the generation that sees all of these signs, Jesus is about to come back. The Messiah is about to come back. All right? And that's important for us to notice how this fits in the context. Why? Because preterists, and these are amillennialists who say, or some, so I think there can be preterists who are premillennials. In other words, they say, Daniel, the 7 years in Daniel, that just played out. It was, what they have to say. This is their hermeneutic. This is what they have to say. Now, preterist is one who says that all of this stuff is done. In other words, all of this has happened. All of Matthew 24 and 25, all of Revelation 6 through 18, and Daniel 9:27, that's all past. And we go, studied a lot of history, but I don't remember anything like this happening. Because we're literalists, we think, well, if there's 7 years left, there's 7 years left, not 40 years. You see what I mean? Wait, no. If 483 years fulfilled itself perfectly to the day, you're telling me that you're thinking 7 years then meant 40 years? From 30 or 33, however you want to start it, to 70? That's not happening, And so the preterists, they love this verse because they say, okay, so this generation will not pass away until these things take place. I said, well, from 30 to 70, that's about a generation. So he was talking about that generation. And all of these signs and stuff, that was fulfilled in 70 AD. When Jesus came again in judgment on Israel. So it's all fulfilled. No, 7 years means 7 years. This generation is this generation that sees these things happening. Because see, the rapture, we can't do this with the rapture. With the second coming, they can see these things happening and saying, okay, I remember when that guy signed that thing with Israel, and we're 5 years into that, in 2 more years, the Messiah's going to come back. Because we see all these signs taking place. They're all being fulfilled. In other words, they could calculate it up. With the rapture, you can't do that. Because when Jesus left, the command to the church, and when he talks about his coming and to rapture the church out, he indicates that could be at any time. There are no signs that we see happen and we say, oh, and the closest we can get is what we call stage setting. And there have been a few stage setting events. Probably the most significant stage setting event in our day is the establishment of Israel in their land again as a nation. Because as we talked about, none of this stuff, all of this stuff talks about happening when Israel's in their land with a rebuilt temple. See, that couldn't have happened after the temple was destroyed and Israel was dispersed all over the world. None of this could have happened. But God's brought them back into their land, established them as a nation. And he said he would bring them back in unbelief so that this could happen. So that's what's going on here. And he says, heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. In other words, this is going to happen. And I want to tell you, all the promises of Israel will be fulfilled to Israel, not to the church. So he says, for the coming of the Son of Man, we talked about this last week. The coming of the Son of Man will be just like the days of Noah. And we talked about the fact that when Noah was building the ark, there were people married, giving marriage. They were just going along their happy way. And apparently, that's his point here. Even though in the tribulation period, obviously, life is not going to be normal, right? I mean, you've got seals, trumpets, and bowls. So different parts of the world are going to be getting hit. Toward the end, the whole world is going to be getting hit. But apparently, according to what we read in Revelation, those people, even who know that God is the one who's pouring wrath out on them, do not repent. They don't want anything to do with him. Nothing. And so that's what's going on here. And they did not understand until the flood came and took them away. So will be the coming of the Son of Man. Then there will be 2 men in the field. One will be taken, one will be left. 2 women will be grinding at the mill. One will be taken, one will be left. We talked about this last week. The ones that are taken, according to Luke, remember they asked in Luke, wait a minute, where are they going to be taken? And he responds, well, let's just look at that. Luke 17:37. Because it answers the question. We talked about growing up in churches where the pastors use this as a rapture passage. And I remember my pastor using it as a rapture passage. Of course, in their defense, and I don't know about your pastors growing up, but all of my pastors growing up, none of them had the privilege to have a biblical education other than just reading the Bible themselves. They did not have the opportunity to go to Bible school or seminary, the ones I had. And so this could easily be, misunderstood. But somebody read that, 17:37.
17.
Yes, read 17:34 through 37. Luke 17:34 through 37.
I will tell you in that night there shall be 2 men in one bed. One shall be taken, and the other shall be left. 2 women shall be grinding together. The one shall be taken, and the other left. 2 men shall be in the fields. One shall be taken, and the other one left. And they answered and said unto him, Where, Lord? And he said unto them, wherever the body is, wheresoever the body is,
That's the word he's reading.
Yeah, wherever the body is, there also the vultures will be gathered. The eagles will be gathered.
gathered there.
So they say, okay, where are these people being taken to? See, again, I grew up seeing the church here. My pastors always said they're taken. This is the rapture. But Luke, you have somebody specific, the apostles specifically say, okay, the ones that are taken, where are they taken? This says they're taken to judgment. And so this is what we see like we talked about last week in Matthew 13, where the angels come and they separate. And they put some where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth. Remember? So this is what's going to happen. If you put together like this passage, several of those in Matthew 13, and of course Revelation 19, you start to get this picture of when the Lord comes back and we're with Him. He also uses the angelic beings to go and gather up all the unbelievers, and they are judged. Remember we saw, this week we will see, hopefully, no, we're not going to see, but we should see, if we'd gone a little faster, that the Gentiles they'll be gathered all together. The angels will gather them together, and the goats, if you will, the unbelievers, they will be thrown into the lake of fire, or the hell, that was prepared for the devil and his angels. It says. Yes.
It says, where the body is, there also the vultures will be gathered. That Armageddon?
Yes, absolutely. Yes. Yeah,
Wow.
absolutely. So,
You know, he said vulture, but in the King James it says eagle.
yeah, depending on your trend, mine says vultures. My guess is we're clear on the class of bird, but we're not clear on the exact bird. And if
Both raptors.
yeah, they're both raptors. And to be honest, our wonderful idea of our eagle,
Yeah.
they're carrion eaters too.
That's right.
You know,
Yeah,
they will certainly eat dead stuff.
Pick
So.
your eyes out.
So I'm not sure the dead people are care at that point, whether it's a vulture or an eagle chewing on them. So
No, I don't think
so that's what's going on here, and again, it's the generation who sees these things. He's talking future. He's talking when all of these signs take place. So if you're going to take this as past, you have to somehow figure out how to explain all of these things in the historical, political, socio, whatever context of 1st century 70 AD. And you have to take the coming as a coming in judgment. He comes in the clouds and he judges and he returns, I guess. So all of this is past for them. It just doesn't hold up. So verse 43, but to be sure of this, that if the head of the house had known, no, verse 42. So I want you to notice something from here at this point until we get to the last section in 25, which talks about the separation, the evaluation of the Gentiles at the second coming, and the separation of the sheep and goats. All of the things that he's going to say from this point on. Okay, they know all the signs now. They know they're not going to miss the second coming. That's going to be very clear. It's going to be like lightning. So what he tells them from here on out, you be ready, you be alert, you be responsible. So that's what he's about to tell them. Over and over and over, in various ways. First he says, therefore, therefore is therefore, well, all that he said to this point. All right? Therefore, be on the alert. So this affects your life. And remember, this is a message. We've already talked about the fact that Matthew was written to Jewish people. And we just found out that this is actually, even though he's talking to the apostles, Jesus knows that the apostles is not going to be around for this. In other words, this is talking to the generation that sees all these signs. And I believe it obviously would be accessible to them. Once the rapture takes place, there are going to be Bibles everywhere. There's going to be Bibles in Israel. They're going to be able to read this. This is information for that generation during the tribulation period. And this is what he says to them. He says, and by the way, there is definitely a spiritual application for us, obviously. I mean, in the same way, we are waiting for the rapture of the church. And we're to be busy. And we've been given responsibility, and we've been given spiritual gifts. And our evaluation of the judgment seat of Christ is on how we lived our life. Were we ready? Were we alert? All of the things that manifest whether you're ready or alert is not going to a mountain and selling all your stuff, right? No. Because that's not what he told us to do. He told us to make disciples. If we are alert and we are ready and we are responsible in the church age, it's because we're doing what we're doing here. And we're telling our friends and our neighbors. And we're not giving up because there's trouble in our nation or whatever. We're not hoarding guns, or we're not figuring out how to raise a militia or something like that. No. We're doing God's work. Same thing we're seeing on Sunday mornings, right? Psalm 37. No, you don't respond with evil for evil. You let God take care of that. He's going to judge that. What you concentrate on is being faithful and delighting yourself in the Lord and resting in Him and waiting on Him. All the same things we're called to do. But this context is to that generation that will see these signs, and if they survive, they will see the return of Christ if they survive to the end. So he says, therefore be on the alert, for you do not know which day your Lord is coming. But be sure, so when you see these signs, you be on the alert. But be sure of this, that if the head of the house had known at what time of the night the thief was coming, he would have been on the alert and would not have allowed his house to be broken into. For this reason, you also must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour when you do not think he will. In other words, you're seeing these signs. You got to be ready. You got to be alert. You got to be concentrating on doing what he's called you to do. And they have the signs to look for. Blessed is that slave whom his verse 45. Who then is the faithful and the sensible slave, whom his master has put in charge of his household to give them their food at the proper time? Blessed is that slave whom his master finds so doing when he comes. Truly I say to you that he will put him in charge of all the possessions. But if the evil slave says in his heart, my master is not coming for a long time, and he begins to beat his fellow slaves and eat and drink with drunkards, the master of that slave will come on a day when he does not expect him, in an hour which he does not know, and will cut him in pieces and assign him in a place with the hypocrites. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. And one of the things that we see in Ezekiel, I believe it's Ezekiel chapter 20, and there's a few other passages that talk about, remember this 7 years is 7 years set apart for God to deal directly with the Jewish nation again. Right? This is part of that 490 years. So the first 483 had to do with them. The last 7 has to do with them. And it particularly has to do with, Daniel says in Daniel 12 that it is this time period is to break the pride of the holy nation. In other words, it is a time of purifying, a time of refining for the Jewish nation. Zechariah 13 says 2/3 of those Jews will die during the tribulation period that enter it. And all the way back in Deuteronomy, we read passages that talked about him purifying them. And that's what's happening spiritually during that period of time. And he's also dealing with a whole world that's rejected him, right? And he's bringing wrath on them. We hadn't really talked about, because we're concentrating on the focus to the Jewish nation here. We hadn't really talked about how Satan and all of this is imitating God. You know, he has his man, like his quote Messiah, who's going to rule the world, which is imitating what Christ will do during the millennial kingdom, messianic kingdom. He has a false prophet, that supports him in that, and Satan that supports him in that, the false trinity. And so many of the things you see Satan doing in the Bible is simply an imitation of God's plan. And so that's going on as well. He says here, so that's chapter 24. So he's finishing up chapter 24 by over and over and over giving examples that emphasize, as you have seen, and I've tried to underline them in my Bible, be on the alert. He said if the master of the house had been on the alert, they wouldn't have broken in his house. You need to be ready, because the Son of Man's coming when you don't know. You don't know the hour when he will come. Let's see. And so that's the emphasis. Now, that emphasis continues right into chapter 25 with the 10 virgins. And he uses the example of a wedding, first century wedding, Jewish wedding. And in fact, in your notes, on page 3. We'll just read this. We only have a few minutes, but the review of what we just saw. Note carefully in the two previous illustrations of the alert head of the household and the faithful and sensible slave versus the evil slave that both parables emphasize always being ready, because you do not know which day your Lord is coming. The Son of Man is coming at an hour when you do not think he will, and the master of that slave will come on that day when he does not expect him, and at an hour when he does not know. So if you want your master to bless you, and you don't know when he's coming, what are you going to do? You're going to be faithful all the time, right? You're going to be consistent. You're going to be consistently faithful. You're going to do what he's called you to do. And that way, whenever he shows up, it doesn't matter, you know. I mean, yeah, it matters because it's going to be an exciting day, but it doesn't matter in the sense of how you'll be evaluated, because just as the way Christians live their life, you know, some believers only go so far as to say, man, I prayed the prayer and I know I've trusted Christ and that's what I need to do in the gospel, and they just kind of live this life that's kind of, hit or miss, you know. Well, what we probably have not emphasized enough is the Bible is fairly clear that how we live our life in this life will affect how we live our life in the millennium and in eternity. There will be benefit to those who live a faithful, godly life, even in the church age. And it's the same here. In other words, remember that the Jews that some of the Jews will die during the tribulation, and they will be involved in the reigning with Christ over the Jews. But also some of the Jews will survive, and of course they're the ones that populate the earth. Not just the Jews, but the Gentiles do. But these are people that populate the earth during the millennial reign. And their status and their position and their blessing and their benefit in the millennial kingdom will be affected by how they live their life during that tribulation period. If it's not, this doesn't make any sense. You know what I mean? Okay, I believe in the Messiah, but hey, I'm just going to kind of live the way I want to live.
We have to be Psalm 1 people.
Yes, we do. Absolutely. I mean, you're as you look at what we're called to in the New Testament, the normal Christian life is people that get saved and mature and live mature lives and continue to grow in the Lord. If everybody did that, what an incredible brilliance as far as us being light, and what a savory, preserving presence we would be in every nation where Christians exist today. But the reason why our nation is rotting is because that's not where we're at as a church in the United States. And there's no other way to look at it. I mean, that's why we were called salt and light. Because we were the ones that preserved, and we were the ones that communicated truth to a world that was lost and dying. And if that's not happening, that's going to affect those around you that don't know truth. And so that's what we're seeing here. But again, this is directed to that generation of Jews during the tribulation period. And so we will talk about the 10 virgins, and I really think, I know people are going to snicker, but I really think we can do all of 25 next time. And the reason why I say that is it's three blocks, and they all focus on being ready and watchful and prepared. So he really drove that home at the end of this Olivet Discourse. And then we go right into chapter 26, and of course we're headed toward the cross. We're almost at the end with the crucifixion and the resurrection. You might be thinking about your interests as far as where we're going to go from here once we finish with the book of Matthew. There's a lot of things we could do, and so y'all think about what you might want to do as far as a book or some kind of study. All right. Well, let's pray.